What's up, everybody, and welcome to BioS3 Raw TV. Adjust this camera angle. That's better. It's kind of like my bicep shot for like Jason does over on Ice Cream Fitness. Today's July 1st. Some of you may or may not know. You've seen my face on my post on Facebook, and I've talked about him before. But today's the 12th year anniversary of my cousin Christopher, who passed away in a drunk driving accident. And it's a hard day, but the whole end of May to the 1st of July, which is usually the beginning of summer, and everybody's excited and they can't wait to start the summer and have great times at barbecues. And for me, it just sucks, and for my family it sucks, and for the person I'm about to tell story time for, sucks also. Now, before we get into story time, you know, this is about 3 weeks ago, so middle of June, my father was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. Now, he's going through an aggressive chemotherapy radiation right now, and they're hoping to, at the very least, prolong his life. They're trying really hard to save his life because they're going to try to shrink up the tumor and then remove it, and if they can't, they'll at least try to keep it under control. So, you know, positive thoughts for him. If I'd appreciate it that, you know, this all works out. And so story time will start here. Now, I was 17 years old. I came back from college. I was training at Gold's Gym, Somerset, Massachusetts, and after Gold's had been switched over to Sports Plus, I was still trying to gain mass. So I went to Daniel Chapter 1. That was a sports nutritionist to learn how to gain mass, or to gain mass. So essentially I had a nutritionist that I had met, biomolecular nutritionist. When I walked in the door, I met him. His name was Joe Pacheco. Now some of you guys are going to see this, that knew Joey. And Joe was 100% drug-free, weighed 265 pounds with like a 450-pound bench press. And he was like 21 years old or 20 years old. He was young, huge, massive. And he just had this personality. Like, you walked in the door and he was like, "Hey, you here to get massive? We're going to make you so huge you're not even going to be able to fit through a door." Like, he would, you know, he was funny, and he was, you know, he just was larger than life to me because he outweighed me by like 100 pounds. So, you know, I met with him and told him I wanted to gain weight. Went through this system of adding all my stuff in the computer and doing all my macros and stuff like that. Let me readjust this camera angle a little better again so we get my shoulders in there instead of having half on, half off. And I mean, it was only going there for a couple of weeks when Joe invited me to train with him and Eric, the owner's son, who were both powerlifters. So I went to train with Joe, and I would train at J-Zack's gym out in Fall River, Massachusetts every morning at 6 a.m. because that's when they trained. And I would train with him for a while. We stuck through it for a while. And then eventually Joey met a girl named Tanya, got married, went off on his own and started his own sports nutrition. It's called Biogenics, which was out in Seekonk, Mass. Now, I actually left what I was doing and went over to Biogenics and worked for Joe there. I worked as a nutrition counselor. He also had these super hybrid tanning things that, you know, it was like a tanning booth with super high intensity, like whatever it was back then. And I worked for Joe. And he was arguably one of my best friends. I'd known him since I was 17. By this time I was about 20 or 21. I'd already gone to the juice, so it was about 20 or 21. And then Joe closed up the shop. So essentially, we kind of lost touch a little bit. I mean, he had a daughter already. Him and Tanya had twins, and then they had another daughter. So they had 4 girls. And me and Joe lost touch. And we lost touch for a long time, for like 15 years. And I was visiting Rhode Island one day on home from Maryland, and one of my buddies said, "I have Joe's cell phone number." So I said, "You know what, give me his cell phone number. I'm not going to tell him who this is calling him. I'm just going to call him and say hi. So I called him. Turns out he lived in the same house still. And within hours, we were meeting up at the gym with him and his wife, Tanya. Joe had now slimmed down. He was probably 180 pounds. He got into competitive bodybuilding as a natural competitor. He was in the NABF, North American Bodybuilding Federation. And we instantly, it was like no time had passed. 15 years had passed and it was like nothing had changed. We were still us. And then we kept in touch. And now here's the hard part. My girlfriend and I broke up. She moved out. Joe and his wife separated. They were going to get a divorce. And we talked probably twice a week. You know, while I was down here, he was up there. And one, I don't know, Wednesday night or whatever it was, he called me and I was with clients. So I just figured, you know what, I'll call him later, it's no big deal. We're just probably calling because we're bitching about the girls again. And then Saturday, at like 11 in the morning, I'm making my food. And I get a call from him, I look on the caller ID. I open the phone and I said, hey, Joe Zoid, what's up? I hear this voice that says, Jerry, it's Tanya. I said, hey, T, what's up? Now, they had been separated. Why is she calling me from his phone? So Joe died last night. He hung himself. We found him this morning. I remember just hanging up the phone and dropping it. And at the time, Carrie and I were dating, but she was living in Montana. So I didn't have a girlfriend. I was in a transitional period in my life. I had 2 roommates who I didn't know all that well. And I was down here in Maryland with none of my real close friends from Rhode Island. So I called my parents, told them what was going on, you know, after the initial shock. Then I called Tanya back. Because I couldn't talk to her. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. So she asked me to be a pallbearer. She said, you know, there were 6 of us she contacted so that we were closest to him in the end, and asked me to be a pallbearer. I said, of course, absolutely. This was like the end of May. So I took Bruno and Nico, my bulldog, and the Brussels Griffin that I had that passed away last year, put them in the car, and drove directly to Rhode Island. Was there for a day, did the pallbearer duties, said my goodbyes after the funeral itself, after the burial, and drove back to Maryland so I can go back to work. And that was it. Joe was gone. So it had been 15 years that we'd kind of lost out on it. Just when things were starting to get normal again and we were starting to kind of laugh about things and accept things that were going on in our lives, like Daddy's gone. And this is just one of the people in my life that have passed away unexpectedly. I mean, this was due to his own doing. So to do this, I can't imagine the pain that Joe was really in to be able to pull the trigger and do this. But he did. So now, between that point in May, my dad being diagnosed with cancer, and Christopher dying on July 1st, that whole span of time, which is usually geared up to the summer and good times, is a real low point for me. And that's okay. Because you know what? Like, you gotta grieve, you gotta have time. It's okay. You deal with it. But I'm sure there's some of you out there that have had similar things, if not, you know, exactly the same things happen to you. But you just gotta kind of move on. Just know that they wouldn't want you to be sitting around weeping about them years after they're gone. BioSUtraining@gmail.com. Leave comments below. www.biosUtraining.com is the blog, and we're out.